Hello, detectives. Welcome to the Coco Case Files podcast, where we investigate and explore true crime cases. Let's start our investigative journey into one of the most infamous unsolved cases in modern American history, the homicide of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. This is not just a story for headlines or tabloids. This is a case study in what happens when investigative fundamentals are missed. My job is to walk you through the case as a fellow detective, as a mentor, and as a guide. Together, we'll look at the story, the mistakes, and the lessons that will make you sharper investigators. It was Christmas night, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, a quiet neighborhood, a wealthy family. Inside the Ramsey home, the holiday lights still glowed, but by the morning of December 26th, everything had changed. At 5:52 a.m., a frantic 911 call went out from Patsy Ramsey. She reported her daughter missing. A ransom note had been discovered. Officers responded quickly, believing they were entering a kidnapping case. Hours later, JonBenét's father, John Ramsey, searched the basement himself and discovered his daughter's body. She had been strangled with a homemade garrote, struck on the head, and left in a small storage room. The ransom note now looked like a staged distraction, and so the investigation began. But already the damage had been done. So, detectives, let's pause on the ransom note. It was 2.5 pages long. Yes, 2.5 pages long. Written on paper from the Ramsey home, with a pen also found inside. The note demanded exactly $118,000, the same amount as John Ramsey's recent bonus. This is unusual. Real ransom notes are short, blunt, and urgent. They don't meander, they don't ramble, and they don't usually tie so neatly to the victim's personal finances. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the note may have never been meant to be taken seriously. Instead, it may have been staging, a theatrical prop meant to push investigators toward one conclusion and away from another. As investigators, that's a vital lesson. Sometimes evidence isn't evidence. Sometimes it's theater. Always ask yourself, was this created to communicate or to misdirect? Now let's step back into that Boulder home. Back into the crime scene, back to where she was found 7 hours later by her father while the police were still there. The first officers arrived and made a critical mistake. They treated the case like a kidnapping. The home wasn't locked down. A perimeter was never established. There was no entry log of who came in or out. Friends, neighbors, and even the family's pastor were allowed to walk freely through the house. By the time JonBenét's body was found, the crime scene had been hopelessly contaminated. Evidence that could have told us who entered that home, what they touched, and how the crime unfolded was lost forever. This is one of the most important lessons in criminal investigation. Most cases are not lost in the lab, they're lost at the scene. Those first few moments and hours are everything. Once the evidence is gone, it cannot be recreated. You only get one chance to process the scene correctly. When John Ramsey discovered his daughter's body in the basement, he carried her upstairs. Now, detectives, pause and think about what that means. The victim is always the most important piece of evidence. Moving her before she was properly processed destroyed critical trace material, fibers, DNA, the position of the body, the integrity of the scene. Again, this is not an accusation. This is a hard truth of investigation. The victim must be treated with care, dignity, and discipline. What we learn from them is often the only voice they have left. The victim and where they are located are hugely important to the investigation. They should be protected from the elements, family, friends, other law enforcement officials at all costs. If you have to move a piece of evidence, then photograph extensively before you move it, and make sure to let the detective and the forensic investigator of your actions. From here, detectives, the case split in two. One theory, family involvement, odd behaviors, inconsistencies in statements, and that strange ransom note really fueled suspicion. The other theory, an intruder. DNA evidence not matching the family, signs of a possible basement entry, and the argument that someone slipped in unnoticed. Both theories had weight, but the problem was this: contaminated evidence left neither theory provable. And here's a professional reminder: bias is the enemy. Tunnel vision is the death of investigations. You do not begin with a theory and search for evidence to prove it. You walk the scene and you let the evidence speak to you. You collect the evidence first, and then you let it shape the theory. The Ramsey case shows us what happens when evidence is too damaged to tell the truth. So, what do we learn from this case? 3 things. First, always secure the scene. No one in, no one out until it's controlled. Second, Separate your witnesses. Every statement must be uncontaminated, just like the evidence. Third, treat every suspicious death as a homicide until you have solid proof otherwise. If these rules had been followed, JonBenét Ramsey's case might be solved today. JonBenét Ramsey's murder remains unsolved, but it is not without value to us as investigators. In fact, it may be one of the most important training cases in modern history. It teaches us that investigative fundamentals are not optional. They are the thin line between truth and a mystery that lasts decades. This was Case File 001, the Ramsey House Homicide. In our next case file, we'll study another crime, another investigation, and another chance to sharpen our skills. Until then, detectives, secure your scenes, trust the evidence, and never stop asking questions.